Morning mist hung low over Fort Bragg's outdoor firing range, creating an ethereal backdrop that seemed almost too peaceful for a military installation. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez adjusted his Kevlar helmet and checked his watch. 0630 hours, right on schedule for the weekly marksmanship evaluation. As the range safety officer for Delta Company's newest batch of recruits, he'd seen it all. Cocky hotshots who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, nervous rookies whose hands shook so badly they could barely load their magazines, and everything in between. But this Tuesday morning felt different somehow, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. The recruits were already assembled in their designated lanes, their M4 carbines gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the covered firing line. 22 fresh faces, most barely out of their teens, all trying to look tough and ready while secretly battling the butterflies in their stomachs. Rodriguez had been doing this job for 8 years, and he could read them like open books. The way Private Johnson kept flexing his jaw muscles revealed his anxiety, while Private Martinez's overly casual stance screamed overconfidence that would likely crumble at the first sign of difficulty. "All right, listen up," Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Today's qualification shoot determines whether you move forward in your training or spend another week learning how to properly hold a weapon. No pressure." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the group, exactly the response he'd expected. Zeus. He began his standard safety briefing. Finger off the trigger until ready to fire, muzzle always downrange, treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Rodriguez noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Lane 23, the furthest position on the left side of the range, had been empty just moments ago. Now, a solitary figure stood there, methodically unpacking what appeared to be a custom rifle case. The woman was unremarkable at first glance. Average height, maybe 5'6", with graying brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore civilian clothes, worn jeans, a faded gray t-shirt, and weathered hiking boots that had clearly seen their share of rough terrain. Her movements were economical, precise, but unhurried. There was something almost meditative about the way she assembled her rifle, each component sliding into place with practiced ease. Rodriguez frowned slightly. Civilians weren't typically allowed on the range during active military training, especially not during qualification shoots. He made a mental note to check with range control about the scheduling mix-up. But first, he needed to finish briefing his recruits. "Remember, this isn't about speed," he continued, his eyes drifting back to the mysterious woman despite his best efforts to focus on his soldiers. "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Controlled breathing, proper sight alignment, and follow through. These fundamentals will save your life in the field and keep your battle buddies alive too." The woman had finished assembling her rifle, a sleek, matte black precision instrument that Rodriguez couldn't immediately identify, though it clearly wasn't standard issue. She moved to her firing position with fluid grace, settling into a prone stance that would have made any drill instructor proud. Her form was textbook perfect, yet somehow effortless, as if she'd assumed that position 10,000 times before. Private Williams, a lanky kid from Oklahoma with freckles and an unfortunate tendency to ask too many questions, raised his hand. "Sergeant, who's the lady in lane 23? She doesn't look like military." Rodriguez glanced over again, noting how the woman had gone completely still, her eye to the scope, waiting for the range to go hot. "Focus on your own lane, Williams. Worry about qualifying before you start worrying about other shooters." But, truthfully, Rodriguez was curious too. In his 8 years as an NCO, he'd developed an eye for spotting different types of shooters. There were the weekend warriors who came to the civilian side of the range with expensive gear and mediocre skills. There were the law enforcement types, methodical and professional but often limited by their training parameters. There were the hunters, comfortable with their weapons but sometimes lacking in tactical applications. This woman didn't fit any of those categories. The way she'd assembled her rifle, the confidence in her movements, the perfect positioning, it all spoke of extensive professional training. Military training. Advanced military training. Range is going hot, Rodriguez called out, activating the red warning lights that signaled live fire was about to commence. Shooters, you may commence firing when ready. You have 20 minutes. To engage all targets from 100, 200, and 300-yard lines. The familiar symphony of gunfire erupted across the range as 22 recruits began their qualification attempts. Rodriguez walked the line, observing each shooter, offering corrections and encouragement as needed. Private Johnson was pulling his shots to the left. Classic trigger control issue. Private Martinez was rushing between targets, sacrificing accuracy for speed despite the briefing they'd just received. But it was the sound from lane 23 that kept drawing Rodriguez's attention. While the recruits' shots came in ragged volleys punctuated by fumbling with magazines and bolt manipulation, the woman's shots rang out with metronomic precision. One shot, pause, one shot, pause. Each report was identical, suggesting not just accuracy but absolute consistency in her shooting fundamentals. Rodriguez couldn't help himself. During a natural lull as the recruits moved to the 200-yard line, he drifted toward lane 23, curiosity getting the better of his professional focus. The woman was reloading, her movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. She sensed his approach and glanced up, offering a slight nod that was neither friendly nor unfriendly, just acknowledgement. Up close, Rodriguez could see she was older than he'd initially thought, probably mid-40s, with laugh lines around her eyes and the kind of tan that came from spending serious time outdoors. But it was her eyes that gave him pause. They were steel gray, calm and assessing, holding a depth that spoke of experiences most people would never have. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said politely, "I don't think we've met. I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Range Safety Officer. I wasn't aware we had civilians scheduled for training time today." The woman's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "No introduction necessary, Sergeant. I'm just here to keep my skills sharp. Don't mind me." Her voice was soft, almost conversational, with just a trace of an accent Rodriguez couldn't quite place. Southern, maybe, but refined. Before Rodriguez could respond, she'd turned back to her rifle and settled into position for the next relay. He wanted to press the issue. Proper range scheduling was his responsibility, after all, but something in her demeanor suggested that further questions wouldn't be welcome. And truthfully, she was following all safety protocols perfectly, posing no risk to his recruits. As he walked back toward his soldiers, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The woman's gear was too professional, her movements too polished, her presence too deliberate. This wasn't some soccer mom trying to learn self-defense or even a competitive shooter looking for practice time. This was someone with serious training, serious experience, and serious purpose. The qualification shoot continued, and Rodriguez forced himself to focus on his primary responsibility. Private Johnson had corrected his trigger control issues and was now grouping shots much better. Private Martinez had finally slowed down and was achieving the accuracy his rushed first attempts had lacked. The morning was progressing normally by military standards, but every few minutes that distinctive crack from lane 23 would sound, perfectly timed, perfectly controlled. Rodriguez found himself glancing at his watch, counting the intervals. 30 seconds between shots. Not rushed, not hesitant, just completely consistent. That kind of rhythm spoke of not just training, but muscle memory developed over years of high-pressure shooting. During the final relay at 300 yards, something happened that Rodriguez would remember for the rest of his career. Private Williams, the same kid who'd asked about the woman earlier, was struggling badly with the longer distance. His shots were going wild, frustration evident in his increasingly erratic positioning and hurried bolt manipulation. "Williams," Rodriguez called out, "take a breath, reset your position and start over." But Williams was rattled now, the kind of mental tailspin that could derail a young soldier's confidence for weeks. He jerked the trigger on his next shot, sending the round God knows where, then slammed his palm against the ground in frustration. That's when Rodriguez heard it. A voice, soft but carrying clearly across the range. "Easy on the trigger, son. Let it surprise you." The woman in lane 23 hadn't moved from her shooting position, hadn't even looked up from her scope, but her gentle words seemed to cut through William's frustration like a knife through butter. The young recruit looked over, startled, then seemed to actually hear what she'd said. Williams took a deep breath, reset his position, and squeezed off his next shot with deliberate care. The metallic ping of a hit on target rang across the range, his first successful hit at 300 yards. "There you go," the woman said softly, still not looking up from her own target. "Trust the fundamentals." Rodriguez watched this exchange with growing fascination. In all his years of instruction, he'd never seen a recruit respond so immediately to advice from a stranger. There was something in the woman's voice, authority, perhaps, or just absolute confidence, that commanded instant respect. As the qualification chute drew to a close and the recruits began clearing their weapons and policing their brass, Rodriguez noticed several of them glancing toward lane 23 with obvious curiosity. The woman had finished her own shooting session and was methodically disassembling her rifle, her movements as precise and economical as they'd been all morning. Private Torres, one of the sharper recruits in the group, and a kid who'd grown up around military bases thanks to his father's career, had been watching the woman's performance with particular interest. Rodriguez saw him studying her technique, her gear, her entire demeanor, with the kind of analytical attention that suggested he recognized something the others missed. Torres approached Rodriguez as they prepared to leave the range, his voice low and respectful. "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" "What's on your mind, Torres?" The young soldier glanced toward lane 23 where the woman was zipping up her rifle case. "That woman. There's something about her. The way she moves, the way she shoots, even the way she talks to Williams. It's not just military training, is it? It's something more." Rodriguez followed Torres's gaze. The woman had shouldered her rifle case and was walking toward the parking area, her stride confident and purposeful. Even from behind, there was something unmistakably professional about her bearing, the kind of bearing that came from years of carrying heavy packs across difficult terrain, of moving through hostile territory where a single mistake could be fatal. "What makes you say that, Torres?" Torres was quiet for a moment, clearly trying to organize his thoughts. "My dad was Army, 22 years, mostly regular infantry, but he did a tour with some special operations guys in Afghanistan. He used to tell me stories about the kind of soldiers who operated in small teams, deep behind enemy lines. Said you could always spot them, even out of uniform. Something about the way they carried themselves, like they'd seen things and done things that regular soldiers only hear about in briefings." Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. He'd been thinking the same thing, though he hadn't been able to articulate it as clearly as Torres just had. "She's got that same quality, doesn't she?" Torres continued. "Like she's been places where the rules are different, where you either perform perfectly or you don't come home." Before Rodriguez could respond, Torres stepped closer and lowered, his voice even further. "Sergeant, I think that might be Ghost Recon." The words hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. Ghost Recon, the elite special operations unit that officially didn't exist, that carried out missions in places the United States couldn't officially operate, that recruited only the absolute best soldiers from across all military branches. Rodriguez had heard whispers about them throughout his career, fragments of rumors passed between NCOs over beers, stories that were always second-hand and never confirmed. If Torres was right, if the quiet woman who'd just spent the morning shooting alongside his recruits was actually a member of one of the military's most classified units, then Rodriguez had just witnessed something far more significant than a simple training exercise. As they watched, the woman reached her vehicle, a nondescript gray SUV with tinted windows and license plates Rodriguez couldn't quite make out from this distance. She paused before getting in, turning back toward the range as if she knew she was being watched. For just a moment, her eyes met Rodriguez's across the distance, and he saw something there that confirmed Torres's suspicions. Recognition. Not of him specifically, but of the moment. The realization that her cover, such as it was, had been blown. And in that recognition, Rodriguez saw not concern or anger, but something that looked almost like amusement, as if she'd expected this to happen eventually, and was curious to see how it would play out. Then she was gone, disappearing, into her vehicle and driving away with the same quiet competence she'd displayed throughout the morning. No dramatic exit, no acknowledgement of the speculation she was leaving behind, just a professional departure that somehow managed to be more memorable than any grand gesture could have been. 3 days later, Rodriguez couldn't get the mysterious woman out of his head. He'd run the encounter through his mind dozens of times, analyzing every detail, every word, every gesture, the way she'd held her rifle, the precision of her shots, that moment of eye contact before she'd driven away. It all pointed to Torres's conclusion, as impossible as it seemed. Ghost recon operators didn't just show up at random firing ranges. They didn't casually offer shooting advice to nervous recruits. They certainly didn't allow themselves to be observed and potentially identified by junior NCOs and sharp-eyed privates. Yet here, Rodriguez was absolutely convinced he'd encountered one of the military's most classified assets during what should have been a routine qualification shoot. The thought was both thrilling and deeply unsettling. If the woman really was Ghost Recon, what was she doing at Fort Bragg? More importantly, what was she doing at his range, during his training session, interacting with his recruits? Rodriguez was wrestling with these questions in his office when his phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, a local area code, but not one associated with any base departments he regularly dealt with. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," he answered professionally. "Sergeant Rodriguez, this is Colonel Sarah Chen from Personnel Command. I need to see you in my office immediately regarding an incident that occurred on your range 3 days ago." The voice was crisp, authoritative, and carried the kind of urgency that made Rodriguez's stomach clench. "Ma'am, I'm not familiar with any incident. Could you be more specific about—" "Not over the phone, Sergeant. Building 41127, 3rd floor, office 3D12. You have 20 minutes. The line went dead. Rodriguez stared at his phone, his mind racing. Personnel Command didn't typically get involved in range incidents unless something had gone seriously wrong. But he'd filed his standard after-action report on Tuesday's qualification shoot, noting only that all recruits had completed the exercise safely and that civilian range use had been properly coordinated, a small lie he'd included to cover for a scheduling confusion he still hadn't resolved. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez stood outside Office 312, his dress uniform hastily straightened and his mind prepared for whatever disciplinary action might be coming his way. He knocked twice and entered when commanded. Colonel Chen was younger than he'd expected, probably early 40s, with the kind of bearing that suggested she'd earned her rank through field performance rather than staff work. Her office was spartanly decorated, a few commendation certificates on the walls, a single family photo on her desk, and not much else. But it was the man seated in the chair across from her desk that really caught Rodriguez's attention. He was tall, probably 6'2", with graying temples and the lean build of someone who'd spent decades maintaining military fitness standards. His civilian clothes were expensive but unremarkable. Dark slacks, white button-down shirt, black leather shoes that had been polished to a military shine. But, like the woman at the range, there was something in his bearing that screamed special operations, something in his pale blue eyes that suggested he'd seen more combat than most soldiers saw in entire careers. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez." "Colonel," Chen said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please, have a seat. This is Mr. Johnson from— let's just say he works in an advisory capacity for certain special operations units." Rodriguez sat down carefully, his internal alarm bells ringing at maximum volume. Advisory capacity. Special operations. The euphemisms weren't lost on him. Mr. Johnson leaned forward slightly, his gaze direct but not unfriendly. Sergeant, we understand there was an unusual civilian presence at your range on Tuesday morning. We'd like to hear your account of that incident. Sir, I'm not sure what you mean by unusual. We did have one civilian shooter present, but range control indicated it had been properly coordinated. Another small lie, but Rodriguez wasn't about to admit to a security lapse in front of what was clearly military intelligence. Johnson and Chen exchanged a glance that Rodriguez couldn't interpret. Then Johnson smiled, the first genuine expression Rodriguez had seen from him. Sergeant, let me be direct with you. The woman you encountered on Tuesday morning is someone we've been looking for. Not because she's done anything wrong, but because let's say she's been off the grid for longer than we'd prefer. Your encounter with her was the first confirmed sighting we've had in over 8 months. Rodriguez felt his mouth go dry. 8 months? Sir, with respect, I think there might be some confusion here. The woman seemed perfectly normal, just a civilian shooter maintaining her skills. Normal? Johnson seemed to find the word amusing. Tell me, Sergeant, in your experience, how many normal civilian shooters demonstrate the kind of precision you witnessed? How many offer tactical advice that immediately improves a struggling recruit's performance? How many carry themselves like they've spent the last 15 years operating in the world's most dangerous places? The questions hit Rodriguez like hammer blows. Johnson knew. Somehow, this mysterious government advisor knew exactly what had happened at the range, down to specific details that Rodriguez hadn't included in any official report. Colonel Chen leaned forward. Sergeant, what we're about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. You'll need to sign some paperwork before we continue, but I think you'll find the truth more interesting than any speculation you might have been entertaining. Rodriguez nodded slowly, his curiosity overriding his caution. Chen produced a folder from her desk drawer containing what looked like standard non-disclosure agreements, though the classification markings were unlike anything Rodriguez had seen before. After he'd signed the documents, Johnson began speaking in the matter-of-fact tone of someone delivering a mission briefing. The woman you met is Captain Elena Vasquez, though that's not the name she's been using for the past 2 years. She's a 15-year veteran of special operations, with deployments to every major conflict zone you can imagine, and several you've never heard of. For the last 8 years, she's been assigned to a classified unit that operates under deep cover in places where conventional military forces can't go. Rodriguez's heart hammered in his chest. Torres had been right. Ghost Recon. 2 years ago, Johnson continued, Captain Vasquez was assigned to a long-term infiltration mission in Eastern Europe. The operation was successful, but during exfiltration, her team was compromised. She was the only survivor. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Rodriguez had heard stories of operations gone wrong, of good soldiers lost in places their families would never know about, but hearing it laid out so starkly was sobering. Following standard protocol for surviving deep cover operatives, Captain Vasquez was brought back for psychological evaluation and reassignment. However, during the evaluation period, she disappeared, walked out of a secure facility one night and vanished without a trace. Colonel Chen took over the narrative. For the past 8 months, we've had no contact with her, no financial activity, no communication with family or friends, no digital footprint whatsoever. It's as if she simply ceased to exist. Until Tuesday morning, when she decided to show up at your range. Rodriguez struggled to process the information. The quiet, competent woman who'd offered gentle encouragement to his recruit was a fugitive special operations soldier, someone who'd been missing for 8 months. Sir, ma'am, Rodriguez said carefully, she didn't seem like someone who was running from anything. She was calm, professional, even helpful with my soldiers. If she's been missing for 8 months, why would she risk exposure by showing up at an active military range? Johnson and Chen exchanged another look, and Rodriguez got the impression they'd been debating this same question. "That's what we'd like to find out," Johnson said. "And that's where you come in, Sergeant." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. "Me, sir?" "Captain Vasquez made contact with you, however briefly. More importantly, she revealed herself to your recruit. What was his name? Torres? That's not accidental, Sergeant. Someone with her training doesn't make mistakes like that. If she wanted to remain hidden, you never would have noticed her." The implications began sinking in. Rodriguez thought back to that moment of eye contact before she'd driven away, the slight smile that had seemed almost knowing. Had she intended for them to figure out who she was? Colonel Chen leaned back in her chair. "We believe Captain Vasquez is trying to make contact, but she's being careful about how she does it. Her unit operates under protocols that make direct communication with headquarters extremely difficult, especially if she believes she might be under surveillance or threat." "What kind of threat?" Rodriguez asked. Johnson's expression darkened. "The mission that went wrong 2 years ago, let's just say it involves some very dangerous people who have long memories and considerable resources. If they've been hunting her, she might have good reason to stay hidden." Rodriguez's mind was spinning. The woman at the range wasn't just a missing special operations soldier. She was potentially a target of foreign intelligence services or worse. "So, what do you need from me?" Rodriguez asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "We need you to make contact," Colonel Chen said. "If she's monitoring military activities in this area, which her appearance at your range suggests she is, then she'll likely show up again. When she does, we need someone she's already met to deliver a message." Johnson reached into his jacket and produced a small, sealed envelope. "If you see her again, give her this. Tell her it's from her old friend Nomad. She'll understand. The reference. The message inside will let her know it's safe to come in." Rodriguez took the envelope, noting its weight and the quality of the paper. Whatever was inside, it wasn't just a simple message. And if she doesn't show up again, then we continue looking, Johnson said simply. "But Sergeant, I think she will. Someone doesn't survive 15 years in special operations without developing excellent instincts for reading people. She chose to reveal herself to you for a reason. The question is whether you're willing to help us find out what that reason is." Rodriguez looked down at the envelope in his hands, then back up at the two officers watching him intently. 3 days ago, his biggest concern had been whether his recruits could qualify with their assigned weapons. Now he was being recruited as an intermediary in what sounded like an international espionage operation. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Colonel Chen smiled for the first time since he'd entered the office. "Nothing dramatic, Sergeant. Continue your normal range operations. Keep your eyes open. If Captain Vasquez appears again, deliver the message. That's all. And if she doesn't want to come in? If she refuses the message or disappears again?" Johnson's expression was grave. "Then we'll know she's in more trouble than we thought, and we'll have to find another way to help her. But Sergeant, understand this. Elena Vasquez is one of the most capable soldiers this country has ever produced. If she's been hiding for 8 months, she has a very good reason. Our job is to find out what that reason is and eliminate the threat that's keeping her from coming home." Rodriguez nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy pack. As he prepared to leave, Johnson called out one final instruction. "Sergeant, one more thing. If you do encounter Captain Vasquez again, don't try to be a hero. Don't try to detain her or force her to come with you. Just deliver the message and let her make her own choice. The people she might be hiding from, they're not the kind of enemies you want to attract attention from." Walking back to his office, Rodriguez felt as though he'd stepped through a doorway into a completely different world. The familiar sights and sounds of Fort Bragg seemed somehow sharper, more significant. Every civilian he passed, every vehicle in the parking lot, every face in the crowd could potentially be connected to the shadowy world of international espionage and special operations. But it was the envelope in his pocket that weighed most heavily on his mind. Somewhere out there, a highly trained special operations soldier was hiding from threats he could barely imagine. And somehow, through a chance encounter at a firing range, he'd become her potential lifeline back to safety. Rodriguez couldn't help but wonder what Elena Vasquez, or whatever name she was using now, was thinking at that very moment. Did she regret revealing herself? Was she already planning her next move? Most importantly, would she trust him enough to accept help from the very organization she'd been running from? As he settled back into his office chair and tried to focus on his regular duties, Rodriguez realized that his life had just become far more complicated and dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The quiet woman at the range had changed everything, and there was no going back to the simple world of routine, training exercises, and predictable military life. The game had begun, and Rodriguez was now a player whether he liked it or not. For 6 days, Rodriguez carried the envelope like a burning coal in his pocket, hyper-aware of its presence during every training session, every briefing, every moment of his daily routine. He found himself scrutinizing every civilian who came, within 50 yards of the range, studying faces and body language with an intensity that was beginning to affect his sleep. Colonel Chen had said to continue normal operations, but nothing felt normal anymore. It was Private Torres who noticed the change first. "Sergeant, you okay?" the young soldier asked after Thursday's training session. "You seem—" "I don't know. Distracted lately." Rodriguez forced a smile. "Just thinking about some personnel issues, Torres. Nothing for you to worry about." But Torres wasn't easily dismissed. The same sharp instincts that had led him to identify Elena Vasquez as something more than a casual shooter were now focused on his instructor's behavior. "It's about that woman from last week, isn't it?" Torres said quietly, glancing around to make sure they couldn't be overheard. "Something happened after we left the range that day." Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. "What makes you say that?" "Because ever since then, you've been watching the civilian side of the range like you're expecting someone to show up, and you keep checking your pocket like you're carrying something important." Torres paused, studying Rodriguez's face. "Did someone contact you about her?" The kid was too observant for his own good. Rodriguez was about to deflect the question when his phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. "Range tonight. 2100 hours. Come alone." Rodriguez's blood turned to ice. The message was brief, professional, and carried the unmistakable tone of military communication. He glanced around the nearly empty range, then back at his phone. 2100 hours, 9 p.m., less than 4 hours away. "Sergeant?" Torres was watching him with growing concern. "What is it?" Rodriguez made a decision that would haunt him for weeks afterward. Maybe it was Torres's obvious intelligence. Maybe it was his demonstrated ability to read situations others missed. Or maybe it was just the sudden, overwhelming need to have backup he could trust. Whatever the reason, Rodriguez found himself violating every protocol Colonel Chen and Johnson had established. "Torres, I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you could get us both court-martialed." The young soldier's eyes widened, but he nodded without hesitation. Rodriguez quickly outlined the basic situation: the mysterious woman's identity, the meeting with intelligence officers, the message he'd been asked to deliver. He left out the more sensitive details, but gave Torres enough information to understand the stakes. "So, she's coming back tonight," Torres said when Rodriguez finished, "and you're supposed to meet her alone." "That's the plan." Torres was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. Then he looked up with the kind of determination Rodriguez had seen in seasoned combat veterans. "Sergeant, with all due respect, that's a terrible plan. If this woman really is who you think she is, and if she's been running from the kind of people you described, then meeting her alone makes you a target too. You need backup." The instructions were very specific. Come alone. If she sees anyone else, she might disappear again. "Not anyone else," Torres corrected. "Anyone she doesn't trust. But she already interacted with me once. She gave me shooting advice, remember? If I'm there but staying back, out of sight, it's not the same as bringing a stranger." Rodriguez wanted to say no. Every instinct told him not to involve a junior soldier in what could become a dangerous situation. But Torres was right about the tactical considerations. And truthfully, Rodriguez was terrified of facing Elena Vasquez alone. "If I agree to this, and I'm not saying I will, you follow my lead completely. No independent action, no heroics, no questions. You're there. Purely as backup in case something goes wrong." Torres nodded eagerly. "Understood, Sergeant." At 20:30 hours, Rodriguez and Torres arrived at the darkened range complex. The facility was officially closed, but Rodriguez's access card still worked. A small oversight that he suspected wasn't accidental. Someone wanted this meeting to happen. They positioned themselves carefully. Rodriguez would wait in the main firing line area, while Torres would take a concealed position in the range control tower, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to avoid spooking their contact. "Remember," Rodriguez whispered as Torres moved toward his position, "observe only unless I give you a direct signal. Do not engage unless my life is in immediate danger." Torres nodded and disappeared into the shadows with a stealth that reminded Rodriguez why the kid had caught Elena's attention in the first place. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Rodriguez found himself jumping at every sound. The wind through the trees, the distant hum of traffic on the main base road, the settling of the metal roof above his head. His hand kept drifting to the envelope in his pocket, checking and rechecking its presence. At exactly 2100 hours, a figure emerged from the tree line at the far end of the range. Elena Vasquez moved like smoke, her approach so silent and controlled that Rodriguez might have missed her entirely if he hadn't been watching. For her arrival, she was dressed in dark tactical clothing, black cargo pants, dark gray long-sleeved shirt, boots that made no sound on the concrete. Even in the dim light, Rodriguez could see that she was armed, though she kept her hands visible and non-threatening. She stopped about 20 feet away, close enough to talk but far enough to maintain tactical advantage. In the darkness, her face was mostly shadows, but Rodriguez could feel the intensity of her gaze studying him, reading him, evaluating the threat he might represent. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said quietly. Her voice carried the same calm authority. He remembered, but there was an edge to it now, a wariness that hadn't been present during their first encounter. "Ma'am," Rodriguez replied, keeping his own hands visible and his posture non-threatening. "Thank you for coming. I assume you have something for me. Otherwise, you wouldn't have requested this meeting." Rodriguez reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew the envelope. Even in the darkness, he could see Elena tense slightly at the movement, her weight shifting in a way that suggested she was prepared to move, fast, if necessary. "I was asked to give you this by someone who said to tell you it was from your old friend, Nomad." The reaction was immediate and profound. Elena's entire posture changed, her carefully maintained composure cracking just enough to reveal the emotional turmoil beneath. She took a half-step forward, then caught herself, suspicion, warring with what looked like desperate hope. "Nomad," she repeated softly. "How do I know this isn't a trap? How do I know you're not working for the people I've been hiding from?" Rodriguez had anticipated this question, but he still didn't have a good answer. "Ma'am, I honestly don't know how to prove that to you. All I can tell you is that the people who gave me this message seemed genuinely concerned about your welfare. They said you've been missing for 8 months, and they want to help you come home safely." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Home? As if such a place exists for people like me anymore." She studied Rodriguez for a long moment, her internal debate playing out across her shadowed features. Finally, she stepped forward and extended her hand for the envelope. "If this is a trap, Sergeant, I want you to know that you're in as much danger as I am. The people hunting me don't leave witnesses. Rodriguez handed over the envelope, trying not to think too hard about the implications of what she just said. Elena opened it carefully, using a small penlight to read the contents. As she read, her expression shifted through surprise, confusion, and finally something that might have been relief. "This is unexpected," she said after several minutes. "Good news, I hope." Elena folded the letter and tucked it into her jacket. "It's complicated, but yes, potentially good news." She looked up at Rodriguez with what seemed like genuine gratitude. "Thank you for taking the risk to deliver this. I know you didn't have to get involved." "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Why did you let us figure out who you were last week? Someone with your training could have remained invisible if you'd wanted to." Elena's smile was barely visible in the darkness, but Rodriguez could hear it in her voice. "Because sometimes, Sergeant, even ghosts need to be seen by someone. I've been alone for 8 months, carrying secrets that could get me killed, running from enemies I can't identify or confront directly. Last Tuesday, watching you work with those young soldiers, seeing their dedication and professionalism, it reminded me why I became a soldier in the first place." She paused, looking out across the range toward the distant lights of the main base. "I suppose I wanted to remember what it felt like to be part of something larger than myself, even for just a few hours. And when that boy, Torres, started struggling with his shots, I couldn't help myself. Good soldiers should help each other, regardless of the circumstances." Rodriguez felt an unexpected surge of emotion at her words. The woman standing before him wasn't just an elite operative or a missing person of interest. She was a soldier who'd been carrying an impossible burden, alone for months, desperately trying to find her way back to the life and purpose she'd lost. "What happens now?" Rodriguez asked. "Now I have some decisions to make. The message changes things, but it doesn't eliminate all the risks. I need to think carefully about my next move." Elena began backing toward the tree line, her movement as controlled and silent as her arrival had been. "Sergeant, I need you to understand something. If anyone asks about tonight's meeting, tell them I accepted the message but gave no indication of my intentions. That's the truth, and it keeps you out of the middle of whatever happens next. And if they ask me to set up another meeting," Elena paused at the edge of the shadows, "then tell them I'll contact them directly if and when I'm ready. No more intermediaries, no more clandestine meetings. Too many people are at risk already." With that, she melted back into the darkness, leaving Rodriguez standing alone under the range lights, wondering if he'd just participated in the beginning of Elena's return to safety or witnessed the last time anyone would see her alive. It wasn't until he was walking back to his vehicle that Torres emerged from the control tower, his face pale but his eyes bright with adrenaline. "Holy shit, Sergeant," Torres whispered. "That was her, wasn't it? That was really her." Rodriguez nodded, too emotionally drained to speak. "What was in the message? What did it say that made her react like that?" "I don't know," Rodriguez replied honestly. "And I'm not sure I want to know. The less we know about whatever Elena Vasquez is involved in, the safer we'll probably be." But even as he said it, Rodriguez knew it was too late for safety. They were involved now, whether they liked it or not, and the mysterious world of special operations and international intrigue had claimed 2 more unwilling participants. As they drove back toward the main base, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had been a turning point, not just for Elena Vasquez, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by her story. The question was whether that turning point would lead toward resolution or deeper into danger. Only time would tell, and Rodriguez had a sinking feeling that time was not on their side. The call came at 0347 hours, ripping Rodriguez from the first decent sleep he'd managed in a week. His phone's shrill ring cut through the darkness of his quarters like an alarm bell, and even before he answered, he knew this wasn't going to be good news. "Rodriguez," he mumbled, squinting at the caller ID. "Unknown number again." "Sergeant, this is Colonel Chen. I need you to get to Building 401127 immediately. We have a situation." Her voice was tight with stress, carrying an urgency that made Rodriguez's blood run cold. "Ma'am, what kind of situation?" "The kind we discuss in person, not over the phone. How quickly can you get here?" Rodriguez was already pulling on his uniform. 20 minutes. Make it 15. And Sergeant, bring Private Torres with you." The line went dead, leaving Rodriguez staring at his phone in the darkness. They knew about Torres. Somehow, despite all their precautions, someone had discovered the private's involvement in the previous night's meeting. 15 minutes later, Rodriguez and a visibly nervous Torres stood outside Colonel Chen's office. The building was eerily quiet at this hour, with only a few scattered lights indicating the presence of duty officers and night shift personnel. When they knocked, the door opened immediately, as if Chen had been waiting directly behind it. "Get in here, both of you." The office had been transformed since Rodriguez's last visit. Maps covered every available wall space. Satellite imagery of the local area, tactical overlays showing roads and terrain features, and what looked like surveillance photographs of various locations around Fort Bragg and the surrounding communities. Mr. Johnson was there again, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 other men in civilian clothes sat at a hastily assembled conference table, their laptops open and displaying what appeared to be real-time intelligence feeds. "Gentlemen," Colonel Chen said without preamble, "Captain Elena Vasquez is dead." The words hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. Torres actually staggered, reaching out to steady himself against the wall. "Ma'am?" Rodriguez managed to croak. Johnson looked up from his laptop, his face grim. "Her body was found 3 hours ago in a warehouse district about 40 miles from here. Single gunshot to the head, execution style, professional work." Rodriguez felt the room spinning around him. The woman who'd stood in the darkness just 12 hours earlier, talking about decisions and hope and finding her way back to purpose, was gone. Murdered. "How do you know it's her?" Torres asked, his voice barely above a whisper. One of the unknown men looked up from his computer. "Dental records, fingerprints, DNA confirmation is pending, but there's no doubt. Elena Vasquez is dead." Colonel Chen moved to stand behind the conference table, her expression a mix of anger and frustration. "What's worse is that this wasn't a random killing. Someone knew about last night's meeting. Someone knew she would be there, and they used that information to track her down." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Rodriguez felt his legs go weak as the full meaning sank in. "You think we led them to her?" "We think," Johnson said carefully, "that last night's meeting was observed by parties unknown. Whether that observation was accidental or whether someone had advanced knowledge of the meeting is what we're trying to determine." Torres stepped forward, his young face pale but determined. "Sir, if we're responsible for her death, if we somehow—" "You're not responsible," Colonel Chen interrupted, "but you may be witnesses to something that could help us identify her killers. We need to know everything that happened last night, every detail you can remember, no matter how insignificant it might seem." For the next hour, Rodriguez and Torres recounted the previous evening's events in excruciating detail. Every word of conversation, every movement, every sound they could remember was analyzed and recorded by the intelligence team. The process was methodical, professional, and utterly devastating as they realized they were essentially providing a timeline for Elena Vasquez's final hours. "The message," one of the analysts said suddenly. "You said she read it, and her demeanor changed. Can you describe that change more specifically?" Rodriguez closed his eyes, trying to recall Elena's exact reaction. She seemed surprised at first, then confused, then maybe relieved. She said it was unexpected, but potentially good news. And she gave no indication of what the message contained. None. She folded it up and put it in her jacket. That was the last I saw of it. Johnson and Colonel Chen exchanged a meaningful look. The message wasn't found with the body, Johnson explained. Whoever killed her took it. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Elena had been murdered for the contents of a message that was supposed to bring her home safely. Torres, who had been uncharacteristically quiet for the past few minutes, suddenly spoke up. There's something else. Something I didn't mention before because I wasn't sure it was important. All eyes turned to the young private. What is it, son? Colonel Chen asked gently. When we first arrived at the range last night, before Captain Vasquez showed up, I thought I saw something in the parking area. A reflection, maybe from binoculars or a camera lens. It was just a quick flash, and I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But now... Rodriguez felt his heart sink even further. They hadn't just failed to protect Elena. They'd walked her into an ambush. Johnson was already on his phone, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences to someone on the other end. When he hung up, his expression was darker than ever. We're pulling you both into protective custody immediately, he announced. If Elena's killers were watching last night's meeting, they know who you are. You're both potential witnesses to their operation, which makes you targets. For how long? Rodriguez asked. Until we can identify and neutralize the threat. Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on how quickly we can unravel this mess. Colonel Chen moved to her desk and began gathering files. You'll be relocated to a secure facility off base. Your units will be told you're on special assignment. No contact with family or friends until we give the all clear. Torres looked stricken. Ma'am, my girlfriend doesn't even know I'm involved in any of this. She's going to think I just disappeared. Son, if Elena's killers decide you're a threat, your girlfriend could become a target too. The best way to protect her is to make sure no one can connect her to you until this is over. As they prepared to leave, Rodriguez couldn't help but ask the question that had been tearing at his mind since they'd arrived. The message, do you know what it said? What was so important that someone was willing to kill for it? Johnson hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. The message contained extraction coordinates and authentication codes. Someone in Elena's old unit had figured out how to bring her home safely, how to neutralize the threat that had kept her in hiding. It should have been her salvation. Instead, it was her death warrant, Torres said quietly. Which means, Colonel Chen added grimly, that someone with access to highly classified information is working for the other side. Someone Elena trusted enough to meet with your sergeant is the same person who betrayed her to her killers. The full horror of the situation crashed over Rodriguez like a wave. Elena Vasquez hadn't just been murdered. She'd been betrayed by someone within her own organization, someone who knew about the message, about the meeting, about the careful plans to bring her home safely. There's something else you need to know, Johnson said as they reached the door. Elena wasn't Vasquez, wasn't her real name. Her actual identity is classified at levels I can't discuss, but I can tell you this. She was one of the most valuable intelligence assets this country has ever produced. Her death isn't just a tragedy. It's a national security disaster. What did she know that was worth killing for? Rodriguez asked. Johnson's smile was cold and humorless. Everything, Sergeant. She knew everything. As they were escorted from the building toward waiting vehicles that would take them to protective custody, Rodriguez caught sight of his reflection in a darkened window. The man looking back at him seemed older, wearier, marked by the weight of terrible knowledge and devastating loss. A week ago, he'd been a simple range instructor whose biggest concern was whether his recruits could qualify with their weapons. Now he was a protected witness in what appeared to be an international espionage operation, carrying the knowledge that his actions had inadvertently contributed to the death of one of America's most important intelligence assets. But it was. Torres's quiet words as they reached their transport vehicle that captured the full tragedy of their situation. She just wanted to come home, didn't she? After all those years of serving her country in places no one will ever know about, facing dangers we can't imagine, she just wanted to come home, and we helped them kill her instead. Rodriguez had no answer for the young soldier's anguish, because Torres was right. Elena Vasquez, or whoever she really was, had spent her final months as a ghost, cut off from everything and everyone she'd once fought to protect. She'd reached out one last time for connection, for purpose, for hope, and that reach had become the very thing that betrayed her. As their vehicle pulled away from Fort Bragg toward an uncertain future in protective custody, Rodriguez made himself a promise. Whatever came next, however long it took, he would find a way to make sure Elena Vasquez's sacrifice meant something. Her story wouldn't end with an unmarked grave and a classified file that would never see the light of day. Somewhere in the shadows, her killers thought they had won. They had eliminated a threat, silenced a witness, and covered their tracks with professional precision. They were wrong. The quiet woman at the range had taught Rodriguez something important in their brief encounters. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who appear harmless, who blend into the background, who strike when you least expect it. Elena Vasquez was dead, but her story was far from over, and Rodriguez was determined to make sure that when the final chapter was written, justice would be served, no matter what the cost.